Ahoy, ahoy to all you smooth sailors out there, and welcome aboard the Deck Tales podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sammy Catlin, and this is the show where we set sail into the captivating world of ship life. Most of the time, delving into the best and worst experiences of the incredible crew members who call the open sea their workplace, but I'm open to the odd exception as well. Whether we're navigating stunning destinations to weathering unexpected storms, our guests all have stories to tell that will make you laugh, gasp, and maybe even shed an unexpected tear. So if you're a seasoned cruiser eagerly awaiting your next embarkation, or just curious as to what goes on at sea, Deck Tales is your boarding pass to a world of nautical narratives. My guest today has simply requested to be referred to as Steve and opted to use an avatar of himself. We both worked for Carnival back in the day around 2010, and it was lovely to not so much see him, but catch up with him after all these years. Steve told me his reasons for starting his ship career, what it was like going from being a math teacher on land to then work on board as a teens club host and then a corporate trainer, what that involved, what some of his highlights were from over 3 years at sea, why he stopped, and what he's up to now. So let's anchor up and dive right in. Now, very nearly said your real name. Steve!
Steve.
Steve, you're looking so well. Goodness me, you've got that real designer stubble going on as well, man.
I try.
You've just been abroad somewhere, right? You have a slight tan, or is that fake tan you've got on?
I think that's just my natural skin color.
Oh, very good. It's not just the lighting. Very good. How are you keeping, Steve? It's on the screen. I've just got to keep looking at it. Steve, there's your name.
I'm doing well. It's good to catch up, looking forward to sharing some stories. If any of that is interesting to any of your followers.
Well, they'll let us know if not. If not, I just won't publish the episode, Steve.
Okay, so, sounds like a plan.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you wanted to keep your name and your likeness out of this. That's absolutely fine. And encouraging, actually, because more people will see this and go, oh, I could do the same thing as Steve. So thank you very much. I much appreciate it. Let's go back. We've met before. So I don't think people would ever be able to piece together who you are based on who I worked with 15 years ago. But, we worked with Carnival. We can say that. We worked with Carnival a good 15 or so years ago, right?
Yeah.
But you can't remember which ship it was.
I can't remember what ship it was. I think you gave me a couple of choices. I do remember, those were both small-ish ships. I wonder if they're still in service.
No.
What, 15 years ago? No, okay.
I'm pretty sure they did away with the fantasy class ships. I don't know if they got rid of all of them, but I'm pretty sure one or two of them have been scrapped. Side note, I made a comment about this in the last episode, and at the risk of sounding stupid and putting false information out into the world, I thought I'd correct myself now. The following ships have all been sadly sent to that great big scrapyard in the sky. The Carnival Fantasy, Inspiration and Imagination were sent in 2020, the Carnival Fascination in 2021, and the Carnival Ecstasy and Sensation in 2022. At the time of recording, there are just 2 fantasy-class ships remaining with Carnival, and that's the Elation and the Paradise. End of side note.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely expect that.
Mm-hmm. They've got to move with the times. I mean, even when I was on that ship, it felt like it was stuck in the 90s.
Yeah, I agree with that. I remember, getting onto these ships as an employee for the first time and remembering that I was a kid when I had gone on ships like that, before. And so, at first I was amazed. To me, it was big, at the time.
It's the biggest one I ever worked on.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, but now, 15 years later, they've got huge ships. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, by all comparisons, the fantasy class ships, do you remember how big they were in terms of tonnage? Like 75,000 tons, I want to say.
That sounds like a number, but you could throw a number at me and I would probably just say yes. I do remember that it was somewhat part of one of my jobs to kind of know what this tonnage was. I do remember the big ships were above 100.
Yeah. I mean, like for context, and I've probably said this before, but like the biggest ones in the world, where you got the Icon of the Seas, that's the biggest one, the Royal Caribbean ship. That's got
Hmm.
about 7,000 passengers, I want to say, close to there or thereabouts. And that's over 210,000 or so tons, I think, off the top of my
Okay.
head. So yeah, we've come a long way. But
Yeah.
so what was it you did on board, Steve?
Yeah. Well, for your viewers, hi, I'm Steve. I started working on cruise ships as a teen club director.
Oh,
And yeah, so I actually was a teacher in my home country of the United States for a few years. I wanted to pivot, do something different. So I knew that I love traveling. I thought it would be cool to work on a boat. I liked, working with youth. So there's a job for teen club director, and I did that. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I transferred to another department. I did corporate training.
that's how I remember you. Yes, you were the corporate trainer on board. So big companies like Carnival, as soon as new crew come on board, they need to drill into you all the corporate laws or the rules and guidelines so that you don't breach your contract and all of this sort of stuff. And that's where you came in, you and another woman who basically ran us through the handbook that was like that big, I think. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. Honestly, I don't remember, much of some of the details anymore because it's been, I think, like 14 years. But I do remember every like Tuesday and Friday when new crew members would come in doing these orientations. And sometimes there would be like a short orientation and then a long orientation. And the long orientation was like 8 DVDs or PowerPoints that you just had to go over. But so I think that's fair. I also helped some of our crew members with their hospitality English. So I actually taught some English classes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting.
So what were you teaching before you did the kids club,
I
teens
was
club?
in the U.S. We have math, not maths, as I know, as it is in the UK.
Yeah,
So I was a high school, a secondary math teacher.
you had to get that in there, didn't you? Math, not maths.
Yeah.
The age-old debate. I mean, it's mathematics in full, but maths
Oh,
is short.
I'm not saying which one is right or wrong. I'm just saying, I know
It's
it's different.
it's like tomato, tomato, right?
Yeah.
But or potato, potato. I don't know anyone, by the way, who says potato.
Me neither. Me
Like
neither.
whoever made that argument is obviously, making up their own rules or something. But so you
And we
did,
work on a cruise ship where we have people, speak English in all sorts of ways. I have never heard potato.
no. But so you were teaching math, then you was teens club director of sorts, and then you became corporate trainer. And how long was your ship career in total?
It was actually quite short now that I think about it. It was 3 years, which I think was 4 contracts.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
why did you start? Like you said that you like traveling and stuff, but was there more of a reason behind it than just wanting to get away and travel, or was that the main root of it?
So, yeah, good question. I don't know if I want to call it an early life crisis, me finding myself and my identity, me being burned out from my job on land, but I just wanted something different and there was the opportunity and I went for it. But as to like why I left cruise ships, I actually didn't mean to leave cruise ships at the time that I did, but I had to respond to a situation at home and I knew that cruise ships was where I was having fun, but not necessarily making the money that I needed to support my family. So
Mm.
that's why I went back home.
And of course, you can't necessarily support them emotionally if you're never around.
Yeah, and it's back in whenever that was, '08, '09, or '10.
Yeah.
Uh, I think even though the internet was there and there was Wi-Fi, just being on ships, we definitely didn't have like free access to high-speed Wi-Fi
Oh
or anything
no.
like that. So it was kind of like even though I could call my family every week or get in touch with friends. you're kind of isolated for like 6 months. And part
Yeah.
of it for me, because I was in that mode, I was in that vibe of enjoying that really intense life that was on the cruise ship and travel.
Mm.
Um, so yeah,
Well, that's it. Because when you're off the ship, your time is your own, and some people they spend that time going into internet cafes, or that's what they did back then, at least, just to
yeah,
get online and speak to their family. But everyone is such a social being, like especially the types of people that cruise ships attract to work on board. As soon as you get to port, everyone's making plans to go to the beach or this place or that place together as a group to enjoy their sort of time together. That's just the way it goes for a lot of people. I know that was true of like for my department. Is that similar for you?
yeah, and I think it's also, let's say, being in port, in specific ports, right? Where it was easy to get to an internet cafe, or get your cell phone out and make calls. Just because we were in port didn't always mean, at least for me, that I was off, right? Sometimes I was working, or sometimes like I would only have a couple hours and needed that time to do some errands or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I heard this the other day. A lot of the ships now they're paying a lot of money to jump on Elon Musk's Starlink satellite network, so they have better connection at sea. Because if the young people today can't get a signal, that's going to really deter them from wanting to book a ship to go on a cruise.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because I think for us that was just a situation, right?
Yeah,
And
you had no choice. But it was a nice choice because it meant you were more detached from your
yeah,
home life in a way. So you could be in that moment to find yourself more so.
yeah, I think it definitely facilitated that. But I also do know, some of my other coworkers, especially from countries that were much further away. I actually think like having the options to be connected, with your family, especially if you make this, a 5 year, 10 year career. I do think that is the right direction to go. But I will say I did take advantage of, yeah, just maybe being disconnected, for a bit. It did help me in that moment in time.
Mm. Yeah, what they should do is they should have like a no phones cruise like charter, like
No phone screws.
no phones cruise. That would be something for kids to help like disconnect. And then it's like, okay, there's the choice. Obviously, the choice to go on a ship and be able to upload a picture. It's always happening now because they offer that service. But the choice to go on a ship and be like, oh no, you cannot have your phone. That's something that people might choose to do voluntarily if it was the theme or the vibe of the cruise. Because,
Yeah,
whenever something's happening, right? I don't know, that when the cameras are rolling, people act a bit differently. I mean, we're telling the stories that we didn't capture on camera. We're telling the stories that weren't being filmed, but we're filming it. but
yeah,
we're not acting differently. We're just retelling stories that we weren't able to capture, right? And I met
yeah,
this and I met this director last September, and he's supposedly making a documentary about all the stuff that I've been writing about for a while now, but yet to publish. And I showed him all of the stuff I've been writing, and he seemed very interested. And he said to me, Sam, what do you think about the idea of going undercover? I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, hidden mics and cameras and all of this. And I was like, let me just stop you there. I was like, how is this going to work, right? I'm the one, if I'm employed by the company, who's taking all the risk, right? I'll be in breach of all the NDAs and the defamation clauses because I'm the one filming. My roommate, my cabin mate, he would also have to be in on it because I'd come back and I'd take off all these cameras and they'd be aware of it. But who's to say if I was on a ship for like 10 months that I would find anything worthy of like, being recorded, incriminating
yeah,
stuff or otherwise? I might as well just go and work on a ship for no reason.
yeah,
So, and I said that to him, like that was me putting a pin in the bubble a little bit to sort of suggest that, even if I'm on ship, I'd be taking all of the risk and da 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 da. Da. So I've not heard from him since. I mean, if he ever gets in touch, he's welcome to take some of the stories from Deck Tales, providing I get my credit, because
yeah.
it's tough to not only work full time, well, as much as I can in my flexible self-employed life, but to spend all the time recording and editing everything. It's a lot of work.
I appreciate you for doing the work. These stories, need to be told. And even though I was on those ships for 3 years, that to me that was just such a unique moment in time. Being disconnected in a sense from the world. Either like a week at a time, and maybe in another sense, like being disconnected from the daily things that are going on land. Like
Yeah.
6 months at a time, right? I remember, leaving and then coming back and you heard Obama was president.
Yeah, things like
These type
that.
of things, right?
Things
Like,
like that.
one time I'd come back and one of my best friends on land was like, "Have you seen this video?" And I don't know if you remember this, but it was the "Hide Your Kids, Hide Your Wife" video. Oh no,
And
yeah,
yes, Anton something.
right? And
Yeah, yeah.
apparently, before
Got a rapist up in
it got
here.
really big. That was a big thing. And I was totally unaware of it, right?
Yeah, but it's not like big news like Obama being president.
Yeah. Well, true. But it was interesting to just be in that space where
You felt
you're
like you were
in this
frozen in
pocket.
time
You're frozen in time. You're in
and
this
then you were
pocket for like
reanimated.
months.
Yes. But so you say about some of these stories that have to be told. What are some of these stories, Steve? What are some of these?
There's so many. Give me a topic. Give me a topic.
Okay, so I've got a couple. I'm just crossing them off as I go. Did you have to do any training before you started to go on
Yeah,
board?
so okay, I'll talk about that. When I finally got my job, and that getting the job was a whole thing, so that might be topic for another discussion. But when I finally got my job, I was excited. I got a email with a bunch of attachments that said, "Pack this in your bag," and go to this port and all of that.
Like a scavenger hunt.
Yeah, a scavenger hunt, right? So I leave my family. I say bye to them. I have this big party with my friends. I know you asked about training, so I'll get to there in a second.
Mhm.
But I had this, party with my friends. It's like, all right, I love you guys. I'm not going to see you for 6 months. And then, I fly up to the port. And this was actually pretty interesting because the ship was in dry dock. So I have all my luggage. There's no elevator. I had to take it up flights of stairs, as the ship was in this big thing that had no water in it. And none of the elevators were working. So that was really, real interesting. All that being said, yeah, I got on, had some training. I mean, it was cut and dry, but I was zoning out because the next day, my very first shift, I was late. My supervisor called me and was like, "Where the hell were you?" I'm like, "I don't know how to like interpret the schedule," you know. So
It's all
maybe I
over the
should have
place.
had more training.
But you then became a trainer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So fast forwarding to a year and a half later or 2 years later, I applied for a different position, got it. And so are you asking me if I had training for that?
No, like there's this sort of sea safety training that some people do before they jump on a ship. It's like sometimes you have to do fire safety, like
Oh,
with the
got
hoses.
you.
Some of that
Yes.
stuff sometimes is quite hairy for people. It was funny for me. I enjoyed it.
Okay, so for training, when our crew members, anyone who's working on the ship, doesn't matter if you're hospitality or working with the youth, or an officer, there's definitely a set of mandatory trainings that everyone's got to take. A quick orientation about the brand, as well as this is what we do for hospitality, and then some regulatory trainings on environmental safety, etc. Also HR training, sexual harassment, and then these other like real like safety training. So I think I have a certificate for fire. I think I have a certificate for driving a lifeboat, but I'm sure that's expired. And I also do know how to drive a lifeboat. I don't think I knew how to drive it then, but I passed the test.
Yeah.
And then in my position, I had a certificate for training managers who would train their staff on hospitality and safety and all of that.
Okay. So you had all this training, but did any of it ever come in handy? Like, did you ever get pushed into a situation where you're like, oh, thank God I had that training to deal with this situation?
I know how to put out a fire, One that's not oil based or grease based. So that is, you take your fire extinguisher and it's PASS, pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep.
Oh,
So
very
I
good.
definitely thought that was useful. Everything else might have gone over my head.
Yeah. But so you never had to put out a fire? You just knew that how you had to do it.
I think I put out a small fire in my kitchen once.
Oh, not on board.
Not on board.
So then what was your, if you have one, standout scariest moment?
Okay, okay. Let me think.
There are a few, I'm guessing.
Well, I'm going to start with one. And so in my position, not as the youth club person, but being in corporate training, you become privy to a lot of goings on the ship, especially because there's a lot of coordination that you have with your officers, your captain, et cetera.
Hmm.
I was doing a cruise from New Orleans to Cozumel, Mexico. So when we come back, that it takes 2 days. So there's 2 days at sea.
Yeah.
And I think you said scary, but I don't know if I would actually put this in the scary I know it's scary for the people who are close to the situation, but I actually will put it in the sad category.
Oh, okay.
As part of my job, I would also give behind the scenes tours to guests who, paid, to be part of an exclusive group of like, 15 people. And we would go to the bridge, we go to the engine room, etc.
Yeah, yeah, I remember doing this, something like that. But you did
Okay,
it behind
right?
the scenes, behind the
The
scenes.
behind the scenes tour.
Yeah.
We would go, see crew living quarters, which, I felt a little bad for the crew who were experiencing it at the time, but it was just, out and quick.
Well, like, yeah, like fish in a tank having like the glass knocked on, like, hello,
Yeah.
all these guests want to see you living in your small quarters.
Yeah, yeah, and these are people's
And the
homes,
little
right?
and the little girl's like, make him move, daddy.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. One of the places that we would go to is like the crew laundry, and then a small room that had a window that was windowless. And I would explain most of these, tours. I would go past it and explain, okay, y'all, this is our morgue. This is a room that we never use, but we have it just in case. We have a medical emergency, someone passes away, and we want to store their body, right? Well, the one time that I got a question about it explicitly, because usually I just like explain it, but then I was like, I don't want to talk about this right now because there's actually someone in the morgue. And I had some guests, ask me what it was. And so the story here was that there was a father who was, I think, having a good time, in Mexico, went to a pharmacy. They have different regulations over there, got some muscle relaxants, and took them along with alcohol, and his heart stopped. And he passed away, and we had to keep him in the morgue until we got back to New Orleans. So that's a sad story, not necessarily a scary story, but I think scary for the family that was involved, during that time.
Yeah. It's a bit eerie as well, like you're giving a tour that includes, as you say, the behind the scenes. Here's the morgue. It's currently got one occupant, but let's move on, shall we?
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, it's such an interesting event too to think about on a cruise ship because how do you think about the information that's getting out there with the passengers and making sure that people are honest about what's going on, but at the same time not causing a situation of panic,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that wasn't just a scary moment, it was like a sad thing. Was there any scary moments like any emergency situations?
So one time on a cruise from Jacksonville, Florida to the Bahamas, the next morning, our ship stopped and a United States Navy submarine surfaced and boarded our ship. They came in with officers came in with guns blazing and everything, and they removed a passenger who apparently was let onto the ship and wasn't supposed to because they were on some sort of no sail list. So I think just seeing that, it was kind of, frightening because it's like, okay, is there going to be a military action that's going to happen on board? You've got these people with guns. And then I think also scary in the sense that, okay, are people going to lose their jobs? Which people who I worked with, who I liked, who might have made in part, a small error in judgment, but also I believe were scapegoated, lost their jobs.
Oh, really? Well, because they let this guy on board in the first place.
Yeah, and at the time it was the head of security who took, quote unquote, the fall for it.
Mm.
But it was not this person's fault, per se. You have multiple staff members from different departments letting people on board on embarkation day. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
But ultimately, what had he done that he was prevented from sailing? Like, why was he on this list, and why was there a submarine coming out of the water to apprehend him?
Yeah, I still don't really have much of an idea. I don't know if at the time I actually felt like this person was unfairly targeted. And I was hearing, whispers or stories, rumors. So yeah, I didn't have a lot of concrete information, but I think this person came from a country that was a high risk country. So I think there's some sort of blanket warning, that was put on this person, but I don't think this person actually did anything. At least I don't remember hearing that.
Well, they were just trying to play bingo and enjoy their cruise.
Yeah, probably.
Imagine
Uh,
that. One number away from calling bingo, and then all of a sudden they pull him out of the chair. Freeze! Get down on the ground! No,
yeah.
no.
I was on a ship where we lost power. I forgot what happened. I don't think there was an engine room fire, but I do remember something was going on. The power was out, and I'm like, are we gonna be stranded in the middle of the Caribbean? I think I just remember the captain like, and I'm sure I'm getting the technical details of this wrong, but the captain mustering enough power to send like one email to shore that said like help. I remember yeah, being stranded for a few hours. So I think that was relatively scary. But other than that, I mean, I actually felt pretty secure for my own safety on
Across the 3 years.
across the 3 years.
Well, that's good. But in terms of like other people's safety, did you encounter things that were fraught with danger? Well, let's think, like
Well, yeah, I had
altercations.
altercation. Oh, you know what? Not a small one, not necessarily an altercation, but I gotta give it up for our entertainment technicians who are in charge of moving a lot of heavy equipment and making these shows work and making them entertaining. I do know the landscape of those types of shows on cruises is I think sadly changed over the past few years, and I just don't think they're doing as many shows anymore. But they used to back in our time, right?
Mm.
And so I remember, there's a show going on, and there was, the ship was a little rocky, but they're still doing their show. But there's a bunch of heavy equipment that they've got to like take on the stage, off the stage, etc. And apparently, something happened, and this really heavy equipment, I think, fell on one of the technicians, and I think the technician was from a country in Eastern Europe, and I don't even know what the status of this person is to this day, but I think he had to get airlifted. I remember hearing from his colleague that his face was messed up and all bloodied. So to me, that was scary, and I hope this person is okay.
Mm. Was that as an
And
accident with regards to something being moved during like a crossing? So when the weather was not smooth sailing as well?
I think so. I think
Yeah,
so. Yeah.
goodness.
I think as well as I did hear a little bit of that the technicians were trying to take a shortcut, and so I guess this is the reason why it's important to make sure that crew members, follow procedures, even if they're tedious, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, but another as I'm talking about as you prompted about scary stories, I don't know how scary any of these really rise to, but one of my mentors when I got into the corporate training position was a really nice lady from a South American country. And I'm pretty sure she's retired now. By the way, she told me, "Oh yeah, whenever you come to my country, just come over. I've got a rental house, all that." And to this day, I still think about taking her up on that offer. But she was telling me that she was one of the very first people in my position to do, training for people on ships. And one of the reasons why the company wanted to have these trainers was to ensure an appropriate fluency or proficiency of English on board,
Mhm.
which I think makes sense for the company. But I guess having a trainer and having this trainer also be in charge of administering English tests meant that certain people who had been working on board for a while felt like they were in jeopardy of losing their jobs if they didn't learn enough English by a certain date. And I'm not gonna necessarily talk about like the merits of that. I can see the pros and the cons, but she was telling me when this first rolled out, I had to have ship security escort me around because I didn't want to be over, by the railing on deck three and someone from the quote unquote mafia throw me overboard. And I'm like, damn, that's that's kind of a scary position to be in. And
Mm.
the fact that she felt like her life could have been in danger, for something like this.
Did she tell you that when you were in the role as well?
She told me that, yeah, right when I was in the role. Yes.
So that's added anxiety for you then. You were not thinking about it like that before, and
Well,
now you are.
that's told me, that was back then. Now it's all good. So, you know,
Well, I don't know.
but
But
yeah, and but she's telling me like, especially for people who come from countries where, the amount of money that they're making on cruise ships is like, the choice between, starving at home, right?
yeah.
People's livelihoods depend on it. But yeah, that was kind of a scary story to hear. And then she was like, "Oh yeah, no, but it's fine now. I'm here."
You weren't like, oh, I'm going to go back to being a teens club kid director.
I don't think I was ever thinking of that. I think I was glad to be moving.
Yeah. But you mentioned the quote unquote mafia on board. Did you have any encounters with them?
Nothing, nothing
Because it's
like
one of those subjects
bad.
people kind of tend to gloss over because they don't really have or haven't had many dealings with them. But they're all kind of, I don't know, they're not like bad mafia, like they're not killing people.
No, but are they doing things that are against the company guidelines? Yeah, for sure. Are they having some sort of organized, dark market, dealing? For
Yeah.
sure. What was the organized dark market dealing that I saw? It was finding chips and ramen after the crew bar had closed. So,
They had
so
the
to me, that
monopoly.
was like, I'm like, this is what y'all call the mafia?
Yeah, they had the monopoly on instant noodles.
Yeah. I did hear once that the quote unquote mafia could also quote unquote hook you up with sexual favors.
I heard this too,
You know
but
what I
we
mean?
haven't touched on that properly. Yeah. Who did you hear this from?
Oh, I don't remember,
No.
but they're like, if you want a woman, so there's all sorts, I think there's all sorts of problems that are wrong with this, but this is what I heard, right? If you want, a girl or woman, the mafia knows how to connect you with that. And so that's what I heard.
So they were like, okay, yeah, they'll hook you up with Steve, who's the onboard English trainer, and he will teach you some pickup lines.
That's, yeah, I don't think it was that innocuous, no.
It wasn't quite as graceful and as like chivalrous as that.
No.
So that's all you've heard about the mafia, right? In a nutshell.
Yeah, I haven't really, and then the more I think about it, like I really do hope that that was not a sign of deeper issues because that could be really problematic. That could border on trafficking
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one that when it comes down to it, I would love to speak to somebody who knows a bit more about the trafficking or the mafia side of things. But it's the simple fact of most of the people I've got on my Facebook friends list are people I worked with directly or I remember fondly, and we have each other's contact details like you and I have. But I don't have Facebook friends who are in like the laundry department or other areas that were very far disconnected from my own. But if you know people or you have anyone in mind that you think would be a good person to reach out to, then send them my way.
Yeah, if I do think of some, I'll let you know. But I think I'm kind of in the same situation, and I
Yeah.
think that does speak to I think at least for me, this really interesting phenomenon of the who is on the crew. In a sense, it is really multicultural, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but it's not like a kumbaya. We're all represented, from different international locations because, it makes the experience, better, or because, that's the right thing to do, or because we're trying to, look for world peace. It's because these companies are trying to find the cheapest labor that they can.
Mm.
Uh,
They're not all
and
people that are trying to do their own eat, pray, love like you and I.
Right. And so, I recognize the learnings that, I have had, through the process and, even, much later after the process about, how, everyone who comes on a cruise ships, their motivations and what they are getting out of it, it can be vastly different.
Mm.
I'm going to dare to say that you and I, coming from countries like the United States and the UK, there's definitely, when we think about our privilege and being able to get onto a ship like that and to also leave a ship like that, I don't think we think that our lives depend on it,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. We're not going to be going, oh no, my livelihood, I can't feed my family. I'll figure something out. Right.
Yeah. And we also know that we speak the language, that is at the center of, of the company and the cruise ship. And a lot of our former coworkers did too, but there are all these things about which accents, right, are privileged, which stereotypes that deal with race and nationality and all of that. And
Hmm.
so all that being said, I think I got on this topic because I was like I recognize there are so many people whose experiences I should have connected with in retrospect that I didn't. And partially, it's like structural. It's the idea that if you're working in the laundry and someone else is working, in entertainment, you're in different places and your schedules are different.
Hmm.
But the structure was also upheld by the fact that we had all these different crew. We had the crew mess, we had the staff mess, we had the officers mess.
But we had the crew bar, which was for everyone.
I I like that you say that because that's where I felt, if these different, places where people ate kind of was like reinforced segregation and this hierarchy and this class in the ships, it
Hmm.
was the bar that was kind of like the equalizer, right? It was the bar where everyone's basically everyone on the cruise ship, I would say 90% of the people that I interacted with spoke the language of alcohol, right?
Yes.
So I thought that was really interesting.
It's very difficult to be teetotal on a cruise ship, especially if it's your first time, And when I think about it, because I started working on ships when I was basically 19, the only crew bar I really well, but both crew bars at the time when I went on board, you could smoke inside, and both of them were as soon as you went inside, just a cloud of smoke. There was no option to go in without
Yeah.
breathing everyone else's in. So cruise ships essentially got me hooked to nicotine.
Same. I think I did smoke a little. I don't smoke now. I
Yeah.
did smoke a little bit before I started cruise ships, but then on cruise ships, I saw everyone do it, and it was also a social thing, right? It was one way to connect, even if the connection was just like asking for a cigarette or asking for a light, and kind of like being in that space, right outside the crew bar, at 11 o'clock at night while the ship is going, 20 knots, into the night of the Caribbean Ocean. There's a little bit of a bond there, that I thought that I won't ever have. You
Mm.
know,
20 knots is some speed. Are you sure?
the what?
20 knots. That's full speed.
Okay, yeah, I was bad at the mathematics, even though I was a math teacher, right? The mathematics of cruise ships.
I don't know what's the top speed of the Icon of the Seas, for example. Let me just Google that and I'll get a guesstimate.
Yeah, it was probably more like knots. Uh, sometimes we would do cruises from the west coast of the United States.
No. Okay, so the
Yeah.
22 Icon of the Seas is top speed is 22 knots.
Okay, so maybe I should have said something like 10 or 5.
Well, it's still not that fast when you consider, right? Like 22 knots is the full speed, max full speed of the biggest ship in the world. But if you're going at that speed, it's still not like, you're like holding on and it's like a roller coaster. It's just as fast as this thing can go. And because of
Yeah.
the size of it, it doesn't need to go too fast. It's still making up a lot of ground. But I digress.
Interesting combination of like the physics of cruise ships and what I learned during my time there. Did you know, Sam, that when people use the toilet, right? So one of the things that I learned on cruise ships, especially from our environmental officers, was the difference between black water and gray water. Did you ever hear this difference?
Well, black water is sewage and everything like that, and grey water is sinks and showers and, kitchen galleys and, all of that stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
So you can't just dump the black water into the sea. But
No.
the cruise ships actually, the black water, that sewage is really important to keep. It's one of the things where the engineers have, and I saw this on the bridge in the engine room. They have these screens where they show you the tanks, how much is in the tanks of all of the sewage in these different parts of the ship, and sometimes they'll move that around in order to balance out the ship and
Or like the ballast tanks.
the ballast tanks. Yeah, and one of the examples I got was, let's say we're going off the coast of California and there's a whale on the port side. So all of these guests are on the port side looking at the whale. So they've got to take all the the ship water and put it on like the starboard side to make sure that the boat doesn't capsize. So
What?
that's something that I learned
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
saw the computer displays for all of it. I'm like, okay, yeah.
But is that something that's done manually, given the moment? Like, oh, attention, attention, there's a whale on the starboard side. And then everyone's like, shit, okay, we need to counteract that. It's the same with, not the same, but like, when all the guests would go to the show lounge to watch a show. So there's a
Yeah.
big bulk of people in one area. So, yeah, the ship is always,
I,
in a way, kind
I'm
of,
pretty sure there's some sort of automaticity, but I think it
right,
has to be monitored at all times.
of course.
Yeah. And I think, what I understood too is that they're on the computer displays over on the bridge, there's some measurement of where the center of, I'm getting into some physics terms here, I guess, but where the
Mhm.
center of mass is and how far that is from the center of the ship. And I think, yeah, because if it's too far, it's not going to, go well. The ship can break.
Yeah.
So they've got all these computer programs, doing all these calculations with, the skilled engineers who, live, their livelihoods are based on understanding this information, training for it, and, doing what they do.
I just
Learning
wanted
that,
I just wanted to
yeah.
say it was really funny to think of like how everyone's rushing over the side to see this whale, so they're balancing out the passengers with their basically with their own shit.
Yeah. Well, they have to be resourceful, right? So,
Exactly. It's just a bit of like irony, I guess. It's like you are shit for all running to the side. It's all right.
oh.
We know you're full of shit. We balanced it out.
Yeah.
But sorry, yeah, carry on. You were about to
No, yeah.
jump on a point.
No, it just reminded me. I think this is a little bit of a tangent, but one of the best things that I take away from my time is really just learning and working alongside people from all these different walks of life. So so you and I think have, been in different companies and have had different jobs, right? When I was talking to our maritime officers, they're like, we, do this job and this is what we do for life, right? And I think that the officer who I was talking to was a captain who was from Italy, and I think he said, Italians, we stick to this for life. I don't know if he was making an accurate generalization, or so maybe there's some truth to that I would agree with. Maybe there, maybe it was just his like perspective, but I thought that was a really interesting perspective,
Mm.
especially when I was a young adult and like learning about like the differences between how people think about the world and how privilege plays out.
Most definitely. Let's right. So well, I guess we've made a bit of fun at the guest expense by balancing them out with shit. What would we go to next? Let's say, hey, how about your most embarrassing moment? Is there anything that stands out?
I I'm trying to think about the limits of what I should say.
But don't forget, Steve, you're not really Steve, and you're not really on camera. So you've got full anonymity here.
Besides the things that happen, after the crew bar and a drunken stupor and with romance or things that are adjacent to romance and all of that,
Mm.
other embarrassing moments. But I don't know. I don't know actually. Yeah, and not because other than that, I don't think it's because I'm like trying to hide anything. I just am thinking about like my time there. Every day was a learning experience. I might have had some professionally embarrassing moments when it came to sending emails that just didn't have the tone I was supposed to, and learning that it would come across that some of the things that I did came across differently based on, in large part, the culture of the people who were perceiving whatever I was doing, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, I think there is this generalization that Americans like to engage in a lot of small talk, and I think there were people and officers that I was talking to who were kind of annoyed by this. Yeah.
Because there's a lot of like straight talking, direct communication from especially officers,
Yeah.
and
So I
they
think
don't waste time with pleasantries and stuff.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I wore the wrong uniform once. So I don't think there's anything like major that's going to be super, interesting outside of like what, happens in a two-person, bunk room, at, different times of night.
That's fine. Did you meet any celebs, encounter any activity with those, people?
There was one time that a celebrity, I think it was an American rock musician, someone like Kid Rock, was supposed to have like a charter cruise. And I actually was gone exactly for the length of that cruise to do training for one of my new positions.
Mm.
I did hear that whoever this celebrity was, their guest cabin threw furniture into the ocean, which sucks. But I think that's also a function of their privilege, right? Because what's going to happen to that person, right? Like, they're making money for the company, etc.
So why not throw some stuff into the ocean and pollute it with bed springs and all kinds of things?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. But it was a Kid Rock type of. I like the way you phrased it. Kid Rock type celebrity. Like
yeah. I,
just
I, I mean,
any
it might
white
have
guy
been
with
this
long
actual
hair.
person. It might have been somebody else. I'm not sure.
Just any white guy with long hair who sings or something. Did you do any other charters? Because that was obviously his charter.
I didn't do that one. I did hear about a nude cruise.
Yeah.
Right after I was gonna leave a ship,
Hmm.
and I just heard all sorts of stories about. Well, okay, so when I was working with the youth counselors, one of the jobs of the youth staff was to make sure that the water slides, that there was somebody there, right? And so they're like, yeah, on a nude cruise, that's not an entirely pleasant experience. That's what I was hearing.
Oh, dear. I didn't even think about the things like that. Well, yeah, you just hope everyone is clean when they go down these flumes. Otherwise, they might leave some kind of skid behind them.
There is, I think what I did here is they would talk about two major rules, during that cruise. Number one, wherever you sit, bring a towel.
Right. Yes.
And I forgot what the second rule was, but there was at least
Make
that.
sure it's a clean towel,
Yeah.
not your
And
shit
you know
rag.
what? Like power to nudists. They can enjoy themselves and all that. It's just from people who are not of that world, and you're still like trying to cook and all that. That's a lot
Yeah.
to
I mean, imagine you're like, you've just signed on to work on a cruise ship and you're basically like going out there to try and find yourself, and you're quite a shy introvert. And the first cruise you happen to be working on is the nude cruise.
I mean, yeah, that'll get you out of your introversion. I
E-
will
e-
actually touch
Either,
on
either it will get you out of your shell or put you back inside it.
put you back in, right? And then you stay in your cabin for 6 months.
Yeah.
But I'll actually talk. You talked about introversion. I consider myself an introvert for the most part. Even though I can socialize, and when I need to and have fun. But I will say that being on ships had helped me get out of a shell that I thought I was in.
Mm.
Um, I wasn't completely out of it by the time that I left, but I would not change that experience for the world.
That's
I had never, when I was growing up and going to university, going to college, I never thought I would work on a cruise ship. I thought I would do whatever I considered professional things at home. But, I came in during what I considered an early life crisis. And, meeting people like you, meeting people like a person who was who I would consider my first friend, when I didn't know anybody, who was like, hey, are you from, so and so place? You want to come out and have a smoke? And just those types of interactions that would happen on a regular basis, and people, laughing at the bar, connecting over how their languages are different or how they, think about personal space or
But
stuff like that.
that organic melting pot of like, oh, I guess the rules that we've all been growing up with are just a complete. It's an open buffet, right?
Right? And that there's real human connection there. Even though it was like the human connection came from, this, cruise ship company trying to maximize its profits, right?
Yeah, all for one and one for all.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good. It exposes you to so many different things in such a short space of time. I definitely feel like a lot of people, when they're in it, time just goes so quickly that you don't have time to process a lot of what's going on because you're on to the next thing before you know it. And when you come back, you're then like, wow, I need to take some time for myself because
And
that was,
talking about time too, especially because access to just access to things on land, whether whether it was technical or whether it was like, I'm just so caught up in this vibe in this environment right now.
Mm,
Talking about time, it was really hard for me to understand if it was a Tuesday or a Sunday. None of that made sense to me,
mm.
during some of my cruises. And so sometimes the only reason why I would know what day it was is because of a show that I was trying to catch on TV, like The Office. The American Office was big back then, so knowing that that was like Thursdays. But yeah, time had a different meaning for me on cruise ships.
It was more about like when is the sea day? What day is embarkation, debarkation? Like
Mhm.
what day is the Seychelles? What day what day
We
am
didn't
I
really
on?
have
What day am I
weekend.
on? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was every day was a weekend because there's a cruise, it's a party cruise. But what day am I on? Port Manning. That's the different milestones in the weekly calendar, shall we say?
Yeah.
Did you, as a corporate trainer, do or get lucky with any of the excursions? Did you go on many of those?
I didn't go on a lot of excursions, but I did organize a crew excursion, which I thought was super cool. I think it came out of Barbados or somewhere in the Caribbean, and we all got on a there's like 40 of us. We got on a catamaran. We drank on the way there. It was rum punch galore, and we had some good jerk chicken that was pretty good, and it was a
Mm.
crew only excursion, so that was dope. You know, but here's the additional layer to this particular event for me. So I
Mm.
organized it, as a corporate trainer. Whatever happened, we were having a good time. We went to the other island. We were coming back, and so there's like back on board time, right?
Mm.
And everyone knows you do not want to mess with back on board time. It was back on board time, and the boat was still like making its way, to the catamaran was making its way to the boat, and we're like, oh my God, is the captain gonna just cancel our shore leave for the next 3 weeks? And he was honking that horn. He was so mad.
Did the catamaran basically drop you back off right at the ship?
They dropped us back off right at the ship, and we were just all in trouble, but we were laughing. It was a good time.
Yeah.
It was funny. I was like, I can't do anything. I can't make this catamaran go any faster.
Oh, I love it.
I mean, I always procrastinate getting back to the ship. I was always kind of like just getting there right on, time before crew needed to be on. But so, all of our ships have a, medical officer, right? A ship's
Mm.
doctor. You cannot sail without a ship's doctor. So I'm running, in one of these ports, I'm running back to the port, and I'm like just like sweating and running for my life. And then I see the ship's doctor, and then I just stop running. I'm like, all right, if I'm with you, I'm good. They're not gonna leave us.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, if you just hang, it's well, what am I running for? If I'm late, doesn't matter. They're there.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that guy who took the muscle relaxants and his heart stopped. Was that the only death you heard of in your
No.
time? There was a few others.
Yes. This one is also sad. So one thing that's really important, on these vessels is for the ship's officers to know exactly how many people are on board at any given time, right? And it might look different now, but I remember back then it was a key card. Anytime you got off the ship, you keyed in. Anytime you got on the ship, you keyed in, and so they knew exactly where each person was, right? So on one of the cruises, we had let's say on the day of embarkation, 3,000 people keyed in. And then they go to an island the next day, maybe 1,500 people keyed to go out and 1,500 people keyed to go in, right? All that being said, at the end of this whole cruise, you expect 3,000 people to key back out.
Yeah.
So they got 2,998. Guest services making this announcement. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, could you please call call the front desk or come down to the front desk? It's time to, disembark. Making all these announcements, nothing. They're not getting any responses. So then all of the housekeeping staff and security is tasked with checking each of these spaces, right, to make sure that there's nobody there.
Yeah.
And actually, the quick tangent here is the way we at that time prepare for that is the same way we prepare for a bomb search.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Everyone has a designated searching area,
exactly.
and they all go
And
to it and look it up like inside and out.
right. And then the protocol is the way that you look at the room is like you have to look at the bottom, you have to look at the middle, you have to look at the top, etc.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, they found out that this couple's cabin was locked, deadbolted from the inside, and the security personnel couldn't get in. So they had to go into the next door cabin. There's a balcony, so they had to hop over through the balcony, which is, pretty dangerous, but they did it. And no one was in there. So these two people were just missing, right?
Mm.
No information. Obviously had to, call in the United States, it's I think the Coast Guard or the FBI, the law enforcement authorities. 3 months later, we hear of a news article where a man has washed ashore, a body has washed ashore, and the body couldn't be identified like normally, but not by looking at the face or the fingerprints. All that was decomposed, but there was a pacemaker,
Oh,
and they connected the serial number to the guest who had vanished. And the guests were in their 70s or their 80s, and the thinking was that they committed suicide together. They were at the end of their life, and that's how they wanted to go out. We
oh,
know that
Thelma,
for
Th
sure,
Thelma and
but
Louise style.
yeah,
Well, not style, no, because they drove off a cliff. They threw themselves off the balcony,
yeah. I
or
mean, I
so
think
we.
that is the thinking.
That's that. Yeah, all we can do is
Uh,
speculate.
my hope is that it wasn't anything more malicious,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Like one was like hanging off the edge, and they pulled the other one over the top because they were trying to kill the other one. Or well, yeah, it's all speculation.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
mean, after
But they
three
found the
months.
pacemaker, and so at least maybe there's some conceptual closure there.
Yeah, but like when you're, bobbing around in the ocean for 3 months, I don't know what state a body would be in terms of decomposition. But what
Yeah.
about like dental records? Would that still be possible?
Maybe I didn't hear much else on that
I'm
case.
just curious. I don't know obviously much about body decomposition. That's not my specialist subject.
Oh,
Um,
and I'll tell you something real quick.
yeah, yeah, please. As many as you like.
So semi-related. One of the things that we train for all crew members, doesn't matter what position you're in, is the man overboard protocol, the person overboard protocol, right?
Hmm.
So if you know of someone who has fallen overboard, I think the code is code Bravo.
And some ships, it's just man overboard. They don't
Or man,
sugarcoat it.
okay, so I think on this particular cruise line, that's what it was, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or Oscar.
Or Oscar, there we go. So I'm setting up the scene. It's the pool area, and the pool area has got these pools, and then the railings, that hang off to the side of the ship, right?
Yeah.
And this guest, all these guests are in different stages of intoxication. This guest was like, "Help! My husband fell." And so the crew member, what I remember was really being diligent, does calls it into the bridge. They do a code Bravo. The ship stops, and then the ship is supposed to circle the area, right? That where the person was supposed to have fallen overboard.
Hmm.
And then after all this is set in motion, we find out that, yeah, her husband fell into the jacuzzi. So yeah, I just thought that was funny.
He's too diligent for his own good. Like he just
Yeah.
he heard fell was like, oh no, he just fell over that staircase, that short 323 staircase, or he fell into the jacuzzi. I mean, brilliant. No, that was something like what the Hungarian receptionist on the Paradise told me the other week. He said that they had a ship that one of the guys basically jumped off of the balcony on the back of the ship into like one of the Serenity deck hot tubs. And so they did stop the ship and circled around and were looking for him. But then that person basically was like, I think you might be looking for me because he reported himself back to reception like later on the day. But was that maybe the same incident or was that a separate thing?
That sounds like it could be at least if it's not the same thing, maybe it is the same thing, and I heard a different retelling of it. But if it's definitely two sides of the same, like
Right.
coin, right?
They
Like
are
this
quite.
decision of how serious is this problem. But hey, if it's on a ship, I don't think I think you can never take a problem too seriously, right? In those cases. You remind me of this one other thing. I think there was another time when a wife could not find her husband. It was the middle of the night. Security tried to look into all the public areas, couldn't find the husband. And then in the morning, the guest services puts a PA announcement. And then I think on top of that, they start again like a room sweep where everyone's all hands on deck and checking all the rooms.
Hmm.
Husband was on the ship, but and I think the cabin of a woman who was not his wife.
I see.
Yeah. So yeah. So
So he did a
there's
walk.
no judgment there, but come on, yeah, like
He did the walk of shame, and it was like, oh, it's okay. He was cheating on his wife. That was the other thing. Walk of shame, very difficult to do when you're crew because people are like, hey, you don't live down this corridor. Are you still wearing last night's clothes? Oh, okay. Yeah, I get it.
Yes, yes, and yes. I
You remember all of that. Yeah, you'd have to kind of like try to get back to your cabin with your head down and just like, I don't know, cover your face or something so you didn't get like the gossip was really hard to avoid.
And when you think that people don't know, no, they know.
They know.
They know.
They
Yeah.
all know. Yeah, no secrets at sea. Did you have any nicknames at sea?
Uh,
Sometimes that's quite telling of a person's extracurricular activities.
no, no, I didn't really have any, nicknames at sea. And I think
Or if you did have them, they might not be linked to your real name. So
no, so yeah, I mean, if I did, I would come up with a analogy, right? But no, I didn't.
that's fine.
And what I'll say too is like I think being on ships, there's definitely the capacity for people to be, some wild version of themselves, right?
Oh yeah.
And for me, that was, part true. But I think it was also more than just like, the fun that I had with being at the crew bar, every night and, packing down more alcohol than I thought I would ever, and having all these, some of the crazy things that, I'm not going to talk about on here, right? You know, I, there's also there's some of the threads of real life that continue to happen in that environment, like just being a young person finding themselves, right?
Hmm.
Um, or trying to really being bombarded with learning from all these people that you're around and just kind of like being in awe of how the bubble that you used to live in, how this is so different.
And here
um
you are, 15 years into the future, you found yourself, and now you found your avatar.
yeah, I'm my avatar.
Well, it's funny because the other guy I spoke to, he just didn't want to be on camera. He didn't necessarily have the most incriminating stories, and it's each to their own, of course. You just don't want to be on camera, that's fine. But there's more expression I can tell in your avatar than his polar bear, right? Like
Okay.
I can see the expression lines on your forehead, the movement of your head in every direction, or which way your pupils are going. There's a lot more going on I can connect with here than a polar bear.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And I understand for your viewers, the most ideal thing is to have, live video. But I think
Well, I can't do live. I can't do live, I don't think. If somebody said something incriminating, I can't just edit that out.
sorry, I guess I didn't mean live, but like a video, like a real video, right?
Well,
Uh,
yeah,
but I think my life is so different in many ways. It's been really touched by that experience, but the trajectory of what I do and is so different now, right?
mm,
So I think having an avatar helps me speak freely,
of
about
course, that's the
that
point.
in a way that isn't where the connections I don't have to explain with the life that I'm involved with now. But all that being said, like there's some crazy shit that happened back then, but there's also things I would never give up. Things that have changed me in a way that even to this day I'm like, I don't fault people for having lived a life on land. Like, of course, right? There's privilege that I had in order to be able to do this, but there's still, you and I talking about these things to me is really special because there's something about, trying to share what it was like to be in that time that most people aren't going to be able to relate to.
Most definitely. No, that's why I like talking to people who've been and done it and they're not still doing it because, well, that time in their memory before the social media boom and the smartphone set of revolution is more special to them, like we said, because you were detached from technology and home and all of the stuff that's going on in the world. You were literally living in that bubble, just, working through the motions.
Yeah. And I think, I'd be interested to see, when your book comes out and when you start to like analyze, all these stories, what are some of the things about that time and some of the specific qualities of that time, right? Being out in the ocean, in 2008 to 2012, around then,
Yeah.
uh, access to the connected world was different,
Yeah.
right? What are things about that can, inform us today about how we might like reconnect with each other in like authentic ways?
Absolutely. Well, I will say this. Writing for me, I found it very cathartic. It's not the same when you're going around live vlogging an experience, right?
Yeah.
You write something that's happened that nothing was being filmed or shot or taken pictures of. You're telling a story or retelling a story in its entirety. You're sharing things that wouldn't have happened if you were filming them, right? That's the beauty of living an experience. Going around with your smartphone, going, "Hey guys," so da 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 da. Everyone's on edge because they're like, "Well, where's this going to be uploaded to?" Right? What is the purpose of this footage for? There's a different vibe completely, right? So when I wrote the books, I was reliving memories that I remember very fondly because there was no cameras on, right? You're free to be yourself. And I think the biggest thing with today in society is that kids they want to be able to detach from their phones, but it's never off in a sense of everyone's got this going on and there's all this pressure and stuff. So it's nice when they're able to detach, but they can't do it enough. And to be able to write something based in principle on something where there were no cameras, but to tell those stories that occur when the cameras aren't rolling, it's a good exercise. It's a good way to try to express yourself as well.
Yeah, and I think also I would add to that, being in a place and time where there were no cameras or there wasn't really, this culture of like there could be a camera around anywhere, right? And having people being able to express themselves, but also knowing that we didn't have a tool in our pockets that we could take out the second that we got bored, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that was also to me a big piece of it, of some of the uniqueness of that experience. And lastly, like being in constant proximity with people that you had no choice, around,
Or escape.
yeah, right. Which I think, sometimes created tension, but also opened up connections to people that I don't think we would have connected with otherwise, right?
Most
And,
definitely.
as you're talking about this time, I think about a particular moment when I'm sitting, in like the hallway, by the crew cabins with three other people from different countries like South Africa, Peru, Hungary, and we had a conversation about like what do you call napkin in your language, or or what is this, and we had such a good time, for something that was just kind of like this simple prompt. So I that connection was awesome.
Yeah. That's some good nostalgia you've just fed us there. I like
Yeah.
that. What about guest requests, stupid questions, those types of things that you're just like, what the hell?
I think this one was just a result of inebriation. I was in the bottom of the atrium
Who
on one
was
of
inebriated? You or the guest?
the guest.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I should have been inebriated too, but the bottom of one of these, the bottom of the atrium. So it's like in this ship, it was this big lobby where there's guest services and everything. There's a guest who looked visibly confused, and I was like, "Hey, can I help you?" And they're like, "Yeah, where can I call a taxi?" Around, I'm like, bro, are you serious? Like, I mean, I didn't, say that at the time, but I was like, sorry, can you tell me your question again? And I was like, sir, we are on a ship.
I've not heard that one before.
Yeah,
Literally so damned drunk they forgot that they were at sea.
yeah. Um, there are definitely things that our guests, would have done that are not what I would expect them to do if they were not in a situation like that. I did, hear from a lot of my crewmates what their perception was in particular, of American guests and how their hospitality needed to adapt to them, right? And I think there was a lot of I shared feelings of annoyance or frustration, or this comment that they made was kind of stupid, and I can see why people are thinking that. And I think it's also like it made me realize there are different cultural threads
Hmm.
in every culture about how people like to spend their leisure, right? And how people interact. And yeah, I did see a lot of like people thinking that just because they were on vacation, meaning that they could let go of trying to have good judgment in certain situations or
Yeah.
trying to,
Adhere to
you
those societal
know,
norms that are basically, always present in society on land,
yeah.
but not at sea. No, we're on holiday. Fuck it.
Yeah. So I mean, I of course like I could be annoyed at it, too. I didn't take it personally. I was just like, okay, like this. I would have to categorize in my head. Okay, this person's drunk. Let me just get them to safety, right? This person, asked me a question that is definitely out of this world, but let me just answer it and move on. You know?
But so, if your main reason for wanting to be anonymous, keeping your identity hidden, was because your job today is somehow in like, there's a link or something. What is it you're doing now? Is that something you can talk about or not so much?
In general, I work in education, so I do tell people in my position, whenever I'm applying for positions or working with new people, I'm transparent about having this experience, and I tell them that working with all of these people from all of these different countries in this kind of environment, really taught me multiculturalism, in a really specific way, and that what it means to be outside of my bubble and to learn about how people think, what people believe, what people's fears are, what people's hopes and dreams are, what inequality looks like. And I got did so much of that learning on ships.
Mm.
Um, so those are some of the connections that I continue to make today. Yeah.
So you're teaching what exactly? You're teaching philosophy?
Maybe of sorts. I work, with maybe with this piece. I don't want to get too specific, but in general, I promote education.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, education is good.
yeah,
Thanks, Steve.
yeah.
I think we should wrap it up there. It's been an absolute joy catching up with you after all of these years, and hearing some of your nostalgic memories and how fond most of the time is you pretty much have for that experience. You're grateful for it all as well. It wasn't something that you were just keen to get away from after one experience. You did it for a couple of years, have an informed decision. I mean, like you left it. Why? I forgot.
Family stuff,
That was
life,
it.
things that had
Sorry.
nothing. Although I will say, I was kind of on this one point. I was kind of getting tired of not having a porthole, not having a window to look out of, in my
Mhm.
cabin. And part of me was thinking, if they give me a room with a window, I'll stay for a few more contracts. But I couldn't stay anyway.
It's a big deal. Like
It is a big
when
deal,
you go
right?
from the outside, when you go from the inside out, you're like, oh wow, how the other half live.
I mean, honestly, Sam, we could do a whole nother podcast on all of the ways yeah, just how that ship is it's a small city, and all of the different like hierarchies and how they come through, even in things like who gets a window, right? Or what
Yeah.
deck do you want?
But everyone's got different insights into that, and yeah, I like hearing about how the unfairness of who gets what and where people are placed. It's always different, but the unfortunate truth in the hierarchy sense is that the crew get the indoors and their cabins, and they're sharing like four to a cabin. Staff members are, mixed between outdoor and indoor, but usually two to a cabin. And then anyone who's a manager or an officer gets their own, and usually with a cabin porthole. So,
Yeah.
that's
But
that's
part of
quite
that being
standard.
the incentives, for people to promote, right? And Yeah.
And there has to be some chain of command, and yeah, those small little things make a big difference. Having your own kitchen is never a thing, right? Like no one has their own kitchen or like island countertop to have a stove. Pretty much everyone has. Well, why would you need a kitchen when there's food everywhere?
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's the start of your day and it's the end of mine because you're like, what, 8 hours, 5 hours, 5 hours behind?
I think so.
Yeah. So I let you get on with your day because it's Friday and I'm guessing you got work now.
Yep. Got to go to work. But Sam, it was good, catching up with you, and good luck with this, continued project.
Thank you.
Tell those stories.
Thank you. Thank you for telling yours. I appreciate you. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
You as well. All right.
Hopefully I'll catch you another time.
For sure.
Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you.
Take care, man. Have a good day. See you later. So there you have it. That wraps it up for this episode of Deck Tales. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've been entertained by the tales of laughter, camaraderie and the occasional stormy sea, then don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. There are lots of other shows out there to compete with, so if you are enjoying Deck Tales, why not help us out by going over to Spotify or Apple and dropping us a 5-star rating. This will boost the show's visibility and help to attract new listeners every week. Before I sign off, if you'd like to share your own stories for a future episode, then I'd love to hear from you. Simply get in touch over the socials because after all, the best stories often come from our listeners. As we navigate through the waters of life, remember to enjoy the journey as much as the destination, as well as those you choose to share the adventure with. I've been your Captain Sammy Catlin. Until next time, fair winds, smooth sailing, and may your adventures be as unforgettable as those shared here on Deck Tales. Bon voyage!